Companies like Amazon, Wayfair, Home Depot, and IKEA and many others have been using what are known as virtual product previews on their apps and on their websites to help their shoppers visualize products in and around their homes. Next slide, please.
Next slide, sure.
So these companies have proven that being able to use a smartphone to visualize a coffee table or a piece of art on your wall, it really helps provide confidence to an e-commerce shopper online when they're faced with making a decision based on tiny little images on their screen as to whether that big expensive piece of furniture is actually going to fit in their home and look nice in their home. So what they've proven is that it improves e-commerce conversion rates, it reduces the incidence of returns, but the problem is that this technology is very technical to implement and very expensive to implement. So while these big e-commerce companies have this advantage with this tool, the millions of other e-commerce sellers out there are at a disadvantage because they don't have the resources to implement that. So that pretty much is the reason I started the company NVZN. We provide virtual product previews as a service for the middle market of e-commerce sellers, mostly built on platforms like Shopify and WooCommerce. So as an early stage startup, I thought it would be an interesting topic to cover in our industry outlook to take a look at what's going on with funding for AR, VR companies. Next slide. So I compiled some data from Crunchbase. It's a subscription-based database of all things venture capital and startup funding. So I basically pulled together data for companies who were tagged as either AR or VR, and we're looking at data that was produced in the last 3 years, and it's very up to date. It's up through last week, end of February. So I kind of sliced this into years from the most recent year being March of 24 through February of 25, and then the 2 previous years before that. So our first chart that we're looking at here really tells the big picture story about AR, VR funding. So this is the number of companies that were funded, that received some funding over the past 3 years. And as you can see, 2024 is in the gold color there, in the gold bar, and it's less than half of what it was 2 years ago. So that's kind of bleak. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is, the last slide was a count of companies that were being funded. This one is revenue. I'm sorry, it's dollar based. So this is the amount of funding companies receive. Now, this would look a lot like the previous chart, except that in 2023, Magic Leap got like $580 million in debt financing. And so that's built into that red bar. If you were to take that out, you'd have kind of the same trend line across the last 3 years for the amount of money that's being invested in AR, VR, so equally. Next slide, please. So I know this is probably hard to see for most of you, but what this is a breakdown by funding type and or phase. So that same Magic Leap event is actually visible in the second bar from the right, where you have that very tall red section. So that's much of that is represented by Magic Leap. But I think what's most interesting about this slide is on the far right is what's known as Series A funding. So typically a startup gets pre-seed funding and then seed funding, and then if they're proven to be viable, they go on to earn an A round. And then after that, there's B, C, D. Eventually, there's either an acquisition, liquidity event, or there's an IPO. So, but what you typically see is B, C, D rounds get bigger and bigger and bigger. So what you would expect to see is more money in the B, C, D rounds than the A rounds. But what we're seeing here in this chart is that A rounds make up the majority well, not the majority, but more money has been invested in A rounds. And that could mean a few different things. That could mean that it could be a maturity thing. It could mean the AR/VR companies have not yet progressed to B, C, D, E rounds and liquidity events. But it could also mean that they've been unable to because there's not funding available to them, or perhaps they have not proven viability to progress farther, and many of them may have flamed out. I don't have the information to come to any of those conclusions, but any of those are possible. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So also I understand that you're probably not going to be able to see this, but what this is the Chicago snapshot. And these are all companies that have AR, VR in their industry description, but upon closer look, I wanted to stay true to the data, but many of these companies have nothing to do with AR, VR, and I don't know why they had that tag in their description. So we've got like Sure People, DigsFact, NanoPattern. These companies have nothing to do with AR, VR as far as I can tell, but I left it up there. But others, we've got some alumni from Bundlar in the room. I know that. I know we have people from Omnia in the room. So I think what's most interesting, though, about this data that we're looking at here is Augmetics. And this is basically AR for surgery. And what's most interesting is they have been funded $143 million. So they're kind of they're the Chicago AR unicorn. So that's pretty exciting, pretty cool that we have that. But there's really only a handful of AR VR companies in Chicago that have received venture funding.
Watch your clock.
And
you good?
Yeah, we're good.
And did I keep going?
Let's
say I got about 1 more minute if you.
Okay, so I think what we're looking at here is a breakdown by dollars for early stage rounds. And interestingly, there's not much disparity from year to year. Last year, seed rounds, we had actually more money in seed rounds across the industry, this isn't just Chicago, than we did in the previous 2 years. So that's pretty cool. Pre-seed was pretty close, Series A also very close. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but I think it's interesting. So next slide. We can skip this. This is just a disclaimer. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Ron. We got time for 1 or 2 quick questions here, so I'm gonna. Let's see. I gotta be choosy about this one. Let me start. Actually, let's go back a little bit. You've been involved in AR for a long time. You kind of started since 2012, even. So I guess the question I have for you is sort of looking back from there till now, at least. How would that compare to how you would have thought it was going to progress? Talk about where you were back then. Where did you think it was going to go? What's the comparison? How's it going?
Well, I think anyone who's been around this very long knows that ubiquitous AR VR is like 5 years out, 5 years out, 5 years out, 5 years out. And so it feels closer than ever. Is it still 5 years out? Maybe. But Just seeing all the big companies pour billions of dollars into research and development in this space is super meaningful. And that's not something we were seeing 10 years ago or before that, or certainly even 5 years ago. There weren't billions and billions flowing in.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in here really on a very Chicago-specific question. And I'm gonna throw my own biases into this question because I've been there and I've done that a little bit. And I know you're in the same position now that I was 2 years ago, which is that Chicago is really not a good city to try and start a tech company when it comes to getting venture funding. It is publicly known to be difficult here. With that said, Chicago also has a very good reputation for being a very successful company when it does make investments. So we're very good at betting on sure things. We're really not good at making a lot of risky bets. Given, frankly, some of the evidence from immersive technology solutions that are out there right now, what do you think is the path for Chicago specifically to start making the investments in the technologies that are already proven, that basically these are sure things? These are bets that if, we have examples of other companies that have done this around the country, around the world, they implement this stuff that has a massive return on investment. Scott alluded to that a little bit before. You see this stuff and the ROI is just crazy. So how do we get there and how do we open Chicago up to that?
I don't see how that culture is going to change here in Chicago. I mean, if you're fintech or healthcare tech, you've got a much better chance of getting funded here in Chicago. I think our best bet is that Chicago area companies are able to get funding from elsewhere and still stay in Chicago. And eventually, as those companies succeed, as you said, Chicago investors bet on sure things. So it's not until we become sure things that they're going to start jumping in.